Welcome to Playful Beginnings, a podcast about the magic of play therapy for therapists, students, and anyone interested. In our podcast, we'll explore the deeper understanding of play therapy and the skills we use when working with children.
We hope to help you understand the why behind what we do and how it helps kids heal and grow. I'm Dr. Christy Opiola, a working play therapist and university professor in North Carolina.
I'm Dr. Maggie Parker, a play therapist and professor in DC. Well, hi, Christy.
Hey, Maggie.
We're really excited to continue our conversation with Playful Beginnings with doctoral candidate Amy Work, who is a specialist and in CCPT with ADHD and in a private practice where she primarily engages with kids who have had this diagnosis. And so it's been a really cool conversation as to the different ways in which she works with clients. So last week we talked about how you engage with parents and really starting off with CPRT first. And now I thought it would be helpful, or we thought it would be helpful to kind of explore how you do this with an individual setting within CCPT, what that looks like, maybe a little bit of like what you see happening in the room. And then at some point, I'm really curious if we could talk about like, what if parents don't want to do CPRT first? How do you handle that? That a doozy. So welcome with all of those things.
Thanks. Yeah. Excited to talk about all of that.
Yeah. So maybe it would be helpful to, go ahead, Christy.
No, I was just going to say, where do you want to start, Amy?
Yeah.
We just threw out a whole bunch of ideas. Where would you like to start today?
Oh gosh, well, I could talk about this forever and in so many different ways. I think what I would like to start with is the importance of the child-centered play therapy model for kids with ADHD.
Great.
So there are many reasons why I think CCPT is really important. And one of them is that for kids with ADHD, especially kids particularly who have hyperactive ADHD or the combined type of ADHD, the majority of the adults in their lives have interacted with them in a way that communicates either directly or indirectly, I want you to change. And there's something wrong with you and you're really difficult. And again, as we discussed in the prior episode, it makes sense from a parent's perspective or from a teacher's perspective because the child typically does have behaviors that are really difficult and do need to be different, right? And so children are with ADHD are that's being communicated to them constantly. And so to be in an environment where they can walk into a child-centered play therapy room with a therapist who is accepting them 100% as they are and isn't trying to change them is incredibly therapeutic and helpful. So things like unconditional positive regard and empathy are key for this population because there are a lot of conditions of worth that are placed on them, right? And again, either intentionally by adults or even indirectly by the adults in their lives. And also not only the adults, a lot of times their peers too. Children with ADHD can really struggle in peer relationships, especially when they get into upper elementary because of their impulsivity. And so they're experiencing a lot of negative responses from people in their lives. And so that the child-centered play therapy approach is really important for that. I think also then some people, especially cognitive behavioral play therapists, will say, well, what are you actually working on then? Right? What are you helping them develop in session? Well, we can look specifically at the goals of child-centered play therapy that are very applicable for children with ADHD. First being to develop a more positive self-concept, right? Kids with ADHD, like we said, are experiencing a lot of rejection and negative feedback, and many of them experience rejection sensitivity as well. So not only do they experience this negative feedback, but they feel it even more deeply. And so the goal of developing a more positive self-concept is huge. This really prevents teenagers from showing up to therapy later with severe depression because of such a poor self-concept and come to find out, well, they've had undiagnosed ADHD all their lives, right? Or in girls, a lot of times it can present as anxiety. And so teenage girls with anxiety will show up and come to find out we've had undiagnosed ADHD that's been, not addressed. So there are all these kind of secondary issues that develop from ADHD when it is not, when these kids receive all this negative feedback time and time and time again. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I have to be really transparent is that I'm a play therapist, but I'm also person with ADHD and then my children have it. And so you're going through this and I'm like, what am I going to do about my kids? Am I ruining them? So if you're watching this and you see my face going through all of these different emotions, that's where I'm at.
Yes, yes. No, I understand. It's hard looking at the research. With ADHD, approximately 70% of kids with ADHD have a comorbid diagnosis. Sometimes that's sensory processing related, autism. Sometimes it's neurodivergence related, but a lot of times it's related to depression. It's related to anxiety. And really those things have developed because the symptoms of ADHD have created these really unhealthy, hard relationships in their lives that have then result in this negative self-concept and then, this way of interacting with themselves in the world. So that I think is the most important piece of it. The other thing too with child-centered play therapy is that we know that kids are actually working on things in child-centered play therapy. They are learning to develop self-responsibility. They're learning to be more self-directing, more self-reliant, better decision making, experiencing a feeling of control, developing coping skills, all of these things that are going to support them directly with their ADHD as well. And so that's why in the playroom, I strictly stick to child-centered play therapy. And I'm also really careful with limits and making sure that I am setting limits only when I need to, that I really truly am releasing responsibility for controlling the child myself, for that I'm monitoring my reactions to when I witness or see their impulsivity, that I'm prioritizing the relationship in the playroom, all of those different things as well.
It also sounds a little bit there, Amy, as you were talking about making sure you've done your work, right? So that you can be really congruent to know what, if you are getting activated, right? That we just aren't automatically placing blame on the child, that we are acknowledging that,
Yeah,
right? That sometimes our reactions are related to us instead of what's actually happening and how it's impacting our ability to be in relationship with this kiddo.
definitely. Yeah. I want to make sure that I provide that my relationship provides a corrective experience to the relationship that they've had with the other adults in their lives. I want them to feel delighted in and truly, right, congruently from me, because they can tell when you're faking it. They can tell when you're having a response, right? And I think it's really important, and I know you guys have talked about this too, because I'm also a listener of the podcast, but there are certain things in kids that cause certain reactions in us, right? So for me, it's whining. Woo, whining gets me. And it's so funny because I just had a relationship with my mom about this a couple weeks ago where she was like, "Oh yeah, you were not allowed to whine." And I was like, "There it is. That's why I can't stand it, and that's why it causes this reaction in me." Big behaviors, pushing limits, impulsivity, that does not bother me at all in the playroom. And I think maybe that's why I work so well with this population, because I'm not scared. I don't know, it doesn't bother me. I'm okay with it. And so I feel very comfortable setting limits and releasing responsibility to if they're going to do that or not. So I think it's important to know yourself very well and what kind of population you can work with. And if there is a population that you struggle with, why is that? Can you work on that? Those kinds of things. Yeah.
So I'm curious, what do you see in the playroom with kiddos who have ADHD? Are there any common behaviors or are there any things that show up that you're like, are we dealing with maybe undiagnosed ADHD or, oh, there it is, right here it is in this context
Yeah.
compared to maybe other contexts?
Yeah. So again, I think one of the reasons why it's difficult to say definitively this is how ADHD shows up in the playroom is because there is such a wide variety in how ADHD presents, especially with the different types of it. An inattentive ADHD looks totally different than a combined type. It also looks different based on gender. So yeah, so it is hard to say, but there are some things that you can look for. And I will say there's certain types of ADHD that you will end up with more because it causes more problems in their day-to-day life. And so their parents are more likely to bring them in. You are much more likely to see hyperactive ADHD or combined type ADHD than inattentive ADHD in children. I would say 10 and under. Now, if you work with teenagers, you are going to end up with clients who come in for depression and anxiety and come to find out they have inattentive ADHD that has been undiagnosed. But I'm going to specifically focus on what you would probably see in the playroom with kids, 10, 11, and under. And it's going to be more the hyperactivity type and the combined type. Those are the children that are likely having a lot of outbursts at home, a lot of emotional dysregulation, a really low frustration tolerance. And their parents will say things, they have really big tantrums, or they get angry so mad, they're screaming, those kinds of things. What that actually is a low frustration tolerance. And so you're going to see that in the playroom in terms of if a child is gives up very quickly or very easily sometimes, which that is really fun to work with kids who come in like that, because when you use child-centered play therapy with these kids, they develop a wider frustration tolerance and they are able to stick with things longer and keep trying. That and it is so it's so fun to watch that develop over time. Because typically with those kids, parents will swoop in and try to fix whatever they're frustrated about to prevent a meltdown,
Mhm.
right? But as a child center play therapist, it's not our job to prevent a meltdown. It's our job to be with kids in their emotions and what's going on. And so we can tolerate their frustration and support them in working through it, right? And so yeah, you'll see, a lot of low frustration tolerance, especially at first in the playroom. You may also see your playroom might be wrecked. When
Yeah.
these are the room wreckers at the end of, and oftentimes it's not intentional. They just are very active in their play and they're very involved in their play, and everything is everywhere by the end of the session. So that is a big one as well. Yeah. So I think those probably are the two main things. A lot of times you'll see maybe even more curiosity about things. So these are my kids who are a little bit messier in the playroom, and maybe they're wanting to mix. I have a child right now who likes to mix paint and sand and soap and these different things, and it's just not really aware of the mess that it creates and all of that. So that can sometimes be that. And then I also find that you may find yourself having to set more limits in terms of the sand is for the sandbox and the cabinet's not for climbing on, or I'm not for shooting with the dart gun. So you may find yourself having, that you set more limits compared to a child who doesn't have ADHD in the playroom. So those might be some kind of patterns to look for.
Yeah. When it seems like there's a couple and it varies and it's so
Yeah,
you're kind of it's tough, right? To say
it is.
definitively this is what it's going to look like. But what I hear you
Yeah.
saying is the importance of understanding the research and what do we know about this and then aligning that and trusting your gut within that relationship of how this might be showing up.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes you're saying there's people who will say, well, what are you actually doing? And then the opposite of that is, well, CCPT works for everything. So why would I need to know? And it's like, yes, I am a firm believer that CCPT is applicable across diagnoses. I think that's what a theory should be.
Yes.
And does not mean that we don't have to be aware of and understand the diagnosis, how it might be showing up, and how what we're doing translates to supporting that individual child who may be experiencing a set of symptoms.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it is highly individual too. And I think that's why child-centered actually works well with this population. Because if you come in with a manualized approach to every child with ADHD, that's not going to work because the variety in presentation of ADHD is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. And so just for our listeners, Christy did have to hop off, but Amy and I are going to continue the conversation. I had a question because you've talked a little bit or a couple of times about being undiagnosed, right? So they may be coming in with something else and it's undiagnosed ADHD.
Yeah.
What's cluing you into that? And then what steps do you take when you start thinking, I think this might be ADHD,
Yep.
whether in addition to anxiety or,
Yeah, for sure. So with children, I would say the things that I'm looking for hearing are, is there a family history of ADHD? Because ADHD is a very strong biological and genetic component. So, which also is why many times once we discover the child has ADHD and I'm providing, some psychoed about what that means to the parents, one of the parents is like, wait a
oh,
minute, I think I have ADHD. And I'm like, yeah, you might. But yeah, so if there's somebody else in the family that has ADHD, that can be a tip off. Also, if the main thing that the parents are coming in for are these huge, big behaviors, excessive energy, difficulty regulating their emotions, especially around transitions, and especially all kinds of transitions, whether it's getting ready in the morning, going to sleep, going to a sporting event, getting off the tablet, getting into bath time, getting out of the bath once they've gotten in the bath, even though they didn't want to get into
They
the
didn't want
bath,
to get
right?
in the first place, but now they
Exactly.
won't get out.
Yes, but that anything that requires a shift or a transition is very problematic. Really low frustration tolerance, very highly reactive. So those kinds of things. And that there's not significant history of trauma, because that's the
Right.
other thing is a lot of times kids will present with what looks like ADHD, but it's actually trauma. So
Yeah.
you do have to be really careful, because sometimes kids have both, right? Sometimes
Right.
kids have experienced significant trauma and they have ADHD. Sometimes it's just trauma. Sometimes it's just ADHD. So you do have to be very careful. I personally do not diagnose ADHD myself in children. The reason is because ADHD, like I said in the previous episode, has a comorbidity 70% of the time. It's a very complex presentation and it can be a complex diagnosis. And there are really great quality objective assessments. And so that can be combined with our subjective evaluation and that of parents and teachers. And so if I suspect ADHD, I will kind of probe about that with parents. Some parents are very receptive to that. Some parents are not receptive to that. And oftentimes, when parents are not receptive, it's because they don't understand what ADHD is. And they think that ADHD is that children can't pay attention.
Right.
And they'll say, well, they pay attention when they want to.
Right.
Ding, ding, ding.
That's
Yes,
how.
people with ADHD do pay attention when they're highly motivated. That's absolutely true. They actually can focus very well when they're highly motivated.
Yeah. They
When they're
can't
not
see anything
motivated,
else as long as they're doing what they want.
yes, it's called hyperfocus. And so actually that is part of the diagnosis, is that they focus when they want to, but they
Mhm.
don't focus when they don't want to, right? And so describing that, really it is about frustration tolerance and these big emotions and difficulties with transitions, and that, a difficulty to attend to things that they don't want to do, things like that. Then they start to understand, right? And then I'll say that I really recommend that they get an evaluation, and I have a list of people in my area that I trust that I will send them to. And I'll say it's really important to have the evaluation whether or not they have ADHD, because we can either rule it out or rule it in.
Mhm.
And it's important to know either way, because it would provide us with a lot of information with what our next steps are at home, especially. And so sometimes when I offer it as this is just providing more information so we can also rule out, parents will be more amenable to that
Yeah.
if they're kind of hesitant. Yeah.
And so then I know a lot of parents, I think it's kind of controversial, I guess, at this point, is the use of medication with ADHD.
Yes.
And there is a lot of
Mhm.
research on it.
Yep.
My Instagram has been inundated with saffron. My father-in-law is a pediatrician. He was like, stop.
Mhm.
But how
Mhm.
do you handle that with parents? Do you work with the psychiatrist or the pediatrician who's providing that medication? Do you
Yep.
get release of information? How are you navigating that?
Yep. Great question. So, medication is a hugely important factor with ADHD because it is a neurological disorder. That is very important to understand. It is not ADHD is not a situational diagnosis that then, eventually you don't have, or it is a truly neurological difference in the brain that has mental health implications, right? And so, in the same way that someone who has diabetes may be able to regulate their blood sugar just with a diet, right? And interventions, behavioral interventions, or things like that, they can do that. Meanwhile, some people are going to need insulin no matter what they do because of the severity of it and the function of their pancreas. It's the same with ADHD. When you have a more mild form of ADHD, you might be able to regulate things and function well just with environmental changes and supports. The majority, by and large, do need medication in order to function well. We know from the research that when we withhold medication from people with ADHD, that the outcomes are much, much poorer. There's a much higher likelihood of substance use disorder. There's a much higher likelihood of conduct disorder, being diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, which is a whole nother thing that I could
Yeah.
go on about.
Oh,
Yeah.
I have some opinions.
I have a lot of opinions about that. But and parents are really afraid that oftentimes that if they give their child a medication for ADHD that it's going to change them or that they won't be themselves. And that is not true. When you work with a good psychiatrist to find the appropriate medication and the correct dosage, you will see your child become more themselves, right?
Yeah.
And usually the tipping point for parents, and parents will say, well, how do I know if I need to medicate? So there's a couple things with that. The first is typically that when you see their self-concept being destroyed because of the symptoms of ADHD, it's time to medicate. Because what happens is that kids will start to blame themselves and see themselves as, well, there's just something wrong with me. I know what I'm supposed to do and I don't do it. People don't like me. Teachers don't like me. My parents are always mad at me. I am the problem. Something's wrong with me at my core. It's not ADHD, right? Or this neurological difference. It's who I am. And that can lead to a slew of other problems right then and down the line. And so to me, that is really the biggest indicator that it's time for medication. The other thing too is that if I just think if things are becoming just simply non-functional in the home or at school, then it's time. The good thing about ADHD medication is very quickly if it works, especially with a stimulant medication, within days if it works or it doesn't, and then you can stop and it doesn't stay in your system. It's not like a antidepressant where you have to take it for 4 to 6 weeks and then adjust it and this and that. So very quickly, and usually the changes are pretty instantaneous. With ADHD, what research shows is that behavioral supports, therapy, all these different things are incrementally helpful. Diet changes, supplements, they help a little bit. But the most supportive factor in ADHD is medication, followed by parent training.
Okay. So that would make sense why you really are aligning with the C because
Yes.
it aligns with your belief system about the importance of the relationship and enhancing that relationship while also supporting
Yes.
parents' relationship with their children and ways to support their mental health and their experiences. Because
Yeah.
it's not like you're not just teaching these skills willy-nilly because
No.
kids need to learn them. These skills are being used in the home to foster the relationship, to demonstrate the joy and beauty within the child,
Yes.
and to allow them to grow to their capacity within that
Yeah.
relationship.
Absolutely. 100%.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yes.
I like it
And
when I get it right.
yeah, that's exactly right. And I also, I think it was a month or two ago, a paper I wrote about using child-parent relationship therapy with ADHD was just published in the Journal for Play Therapy that really goes in depth about why CPRT is a good fit for families of children with ADHD. So I really encourage people to go read that as well because it will provide a lot of information on that.
Because there are not a lot of studies out there right now, specifically with ADHD.
Well, unfortunately, the majority of the studies with ADHD are on behavioral interventions
Right,
only.
not with
Yeah,
CCPT.
that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And so, and
Researchers get on it.
there are, I think, I want to say there's 6 studies about using child-centered play therapy with ADHD that shows that it's effective. And so and it is more recent that people are starting to research that as well. So yeah, there certainly is research that supports it, but my dream is to do a study one day with using CPRT for ADHD and really measuring that outcome.
Yeah. Well, you got a dissertation coming up.
That's right, I do. So maybe I'm thinking about doing that. We'll see.
That would be awesome. I'm trying to think if I did have one more question because last week we just kind of full circled it to when parents initially come to ask you about CCPT with ADHD,
Mhm.
your go-to is CPRT. What is there, like, are there times when parents can't commit to that? They can't do that. And how do you handle that within your practice?
Yeah, for sure. So when parents can't do the CPRT group, which is the preferred method, then I will offer individual CPRT with them. And so I'll meet with them independently. If they still decline that, then at the very minimum, I require that parents do a parent session once a month. And
Okay.
in the parent session, I'm just teaching them CPRT skills anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're getting it whether they commit fully in a group, individual sessions, or just in parent sessions. I
Mhm.
won't see a child if parents are not part of any child's treatment plan at my practice is parent sessions. And so at the bare minimum, I'm meeting with parents once a month and I am teaching and reinforcing CPRT. Mhm.
Yeah. Do you ever do the CPRT sessions, whether it be group or individual, while also seeing the child and individual?
Yes. So in
Okay.
an ideal world where
Yep.
time and money and all of that is no thing,
Mhm.
yes, I'm doing individual therapy with the child and then CPRT with the parents.
That's
Unless the child, if parents have to pick one,
yeah.
right, financially, I'm always going to do CPRT.
Yeah.
Always, because that I think it is important for children to have a therapeutic relationship with a therapist, but it is by far more important for children to have a healthy, healing relationship with their parent.
Yeah.
That is going to impact them much more. And so if they have to choose and they're open to both, I'm going to recommend CPRT. Almost always parents want me to work with their child because they think, again, it's the mentality of the child needs to be fixed, right? And that's where they're coming in with. And I can't change their mind in one parent session. So that's fine.
Yeah.
We will start with that and start with parent sessions. But each time I am really trying to focus on and reinforce the parent-child relationship, encourage CPRT, those kinds of things.
Yeah. No, this is really helpful. Things that I hadn't thought of, things that I hadn't explored. We can have a member of the Parker family be part of your dissertation study if you so decide. But no, this was really helpful. And I just kind of want to give you just a little bit of time. Are there things that we did not ask or explore that you think would be important that play therapists hear today? I mean, I understood that we could do this topic for the next 3 weeks and not run out of things to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. My goodness. I think I would not underestimate the impact that you can have in working with the important adults
Mhm.
in the lives of a child with ADHD. So, as a play therapist, I'm not only working with parents. If the teacher is willing, I'm working with the teacher. If their coach is willing, I'm working with the coach, if that's a big part of their lives, because these day-to-day interactions that children with ADHD are receiving from them, it is shaping their self-concept. And I don't think any adult who's interacting with a child with ADHD is intentionally trying to negatively shape their self-concept. They're not. It's just that ADHD creates some pretty difficult behavior sometimes. And as an adult, your stress level gets really high with it. And, you end up yelling or criticizing or, these different interactions. And I think I'm really passionate about it because I can see the effects on my mom, my husband, and my sister and their self-concepts from these interactions growing up. And I'm just really passionate about preventing that. And as play therapists, we can do that. We have a role in doing that by equipping the adults in these children's lives with understanding and with skills to
Yeah.
better engage them. So, yeah.
Well, this is really awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate
Oh,
it. Thank you for
yeah,
taking time out of your day, just all of it.
absolutely. Yes, pleasure. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
Well, and so for our listeners, if you have any questions, please reach out to us at info@playtherapyspace.com, Christy at playtherapyspace.com, or Maggie at playtherapyspace.com. If you have questions for Amy, we will forward those on. Please like and subscribe. And you can also follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, all of those things that I don't really understand that's trying to do that. So, anyways, well, thank you again. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks. Have a good day.